It's my pleasure to welcome to the stage our morning's keynote speaker, Porter Orr. Porter's the director of the Army Capabilities Accelerator, which is a team embedded in the Army Applications Laboratory committed to advancing future warfighting capabilities through strong partnerships with entrepreneurial companies. And throughout his career, he's been a fighter pilot in the U.S. Navy and also a manager of innovation in emerging technologies at the Walt Disney Company, where he led development efforts in R&D and innovation prototypes and emerging technologies. So we're really excited to have him kick off today. And so welcome him to the stage, Mr. Porter Orr.
Good morning. How's everybody doing? My name's Porter. I'm from Army Applications Laboratory. I run the Army Capabilities Accelerator. And I was asked earlier, kind of what does that mean? I try to help entrepreneurs work with the Army. That's a challenging task. And so I've been doing that for about 4 months. Previously, I started at the Walt Disney Company, and I did product innovation and emerging technology there. So I traded in my Mickey Mouse ears, where I was trying to use cool things like artificial intelligence and edge computing and IoT and whatever jargon else you want to pull and make magic happen. Turned in the ears, came to the Army, same technology, now just applied to the soldier. Why is it important to me personally? As you heard, I served for 10 years in the military. This is a vital thing that we need to do moving forward. So that being said, I have around 30 minutes today. I didn't want to bore you with a PowerPoint presentation through that entire time. So I was going to spend maybe 10, 15 minutes kind of giving you a background for those that don't know what Army Futures Command is and how it kind of came about and what Army Applications Lab is all about. Do that for the first half and then kind of open it up for discussion and Q&A, if that's all right. So Army Applications Lab is a new team. We're a startup. We've only been there for about 6 to 7 months, brand new in the Army. We are based around a half block away at the Capitol Factory building, right here in downtown Austin. And we report directly to a 4-star general, I'm forgetting the name. I'm new to the Army, so now I'm thrown off by the ring. I report to General Richardson, and then he reports to General Murray, who's actually the 4-star general over the entire command. So it is a very large headquarters, but the coolest thing about this is it's not an Army base. You know where it is? It's 3 blocks down the road. So I know a lot of people in Austin know that this was stood up about a year ago. Again, I've only been here for 4 months. I'm a Swabby by trade. I don't speak Army, I speak Navy. So that's also been an interesting adjustment. But what we're hoping to really accomplish here, and we'll kind of give it into the why, is we need to bridge the gap that exists between the military and the commercial sector in order to modernize the Army. And how do we do that moving forward? Ideally, what the dream would be to kind of get to driving the next high-tech generation and revolution. So before we get into that, let's just look at some key technologies and where they kind of came from and what they have in common. So things like virtual reality, augmented reality, lithium-ion batteries, what you have in your pocket, the iPhone, or if you're so inclined, the Android, right? All really cool innovations that have come. What do they have in common? Well, one is that they were all kind of based here in the United States, which should be really encouraging to everybody in the crowd, right? So we have a really strong nation of culture of innovation. We want to be able to do this. We have people that think outside of the box and really kind of change the world and make it happen. So that's really great. The other thing that kind of came in common is, especially if you look at the use case of the iPhone, a lot of these kind of technologies have a lot of their, if you will, subcomponents that really started with research and development from the military or from the government. Look at the iPhone. I'm not going to bore you with this whole flow chart diagram, right? But there's a lot of different subcomponents that empower an iPhone to be an iPhone. And a lot of that came from Army research, DARPA, all the kinds of acronyms across the government to build the iPhone. So why do we have to have Army's Futures Command? Well, it's because in the last 30 years, things have kind of fundamentally changed. In the past, we had things like World War II and the Apollo program, really where there was just such heavy R&D investment from a government standpoint. And put simply, what was happening, right, is we were developing the leading edge pieces of technology that commercial companies were trying to then take and then build commercial products out of. The world and the paradigm is now flipped, right? We haven't invested that research and development nearly to the amount that the commercial sector has. So we are now lagging behind. And put simply, there's, the commercial solver out there just doesn't feel like the military specifically is a good partner to partner with a lot of the time. And so we're here to kind of change that. So the result is, unfortunately, we're kind of falling behind. So if you see and take the use case of artificial intelligence, we're falling behind as a nation in the capability of artificial intelligence, specifically focused on military use cases of that. So What you can see on the right-hand side of the slide is just some KPIs that we pulled. The first was total R&D spend from the Army in 2018 was $11 billion. Amazon by itself, market cap of $900 billion, looked it up this morning, $22 billion in R&D in the same year, a 2x. If you look at China, Alibaba, which is, if you will, kind of the Amazon in China, just their spend in artificial intelligence alone is $15 billion until 2023. They're investing heavily in these types of technologies. So the result is we're lagging. Why does that happen? Why have we gotten here? The first is, again, right, we started with Apollo-type mindset, and we've shifted away from that. And the first reason we shifted away from that is it's no surprise to anybody in the room. We've been fighting a war for the last 2 decades. Terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda require different sorts of innovation, not high technological innovation. We have limited resources. So the Army realized that, hey, we just haven't modernized, right? We just haven't focused on innovation to the max extent that we could over the past decade, and that's a problem. If we're going to move forward, we need to go after that. We need to address that problem. Secondarily, of course, there's just this elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about, right? Which is there's just a frayed relationship between commercial sector and specifically high technology companies and the military or the government. Reference Microsoft and Google, where very talented and wonderful organizations with talented workforces are protesting against working for the government and specifically the military. We can't do this without them. And so how do we mend those bonds, right? And how do we start to develop that relationship with that company, those companies, that commercial sector? It's imperative. So the director of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, General Shanahan out of Washington, D.C., was actually quoted a week ago of saying this in the press, was saying, if we want to succeed and not fall further behind, right, in terms of artificial intelligence, it's imperative that we partner with these companies. So we can't address the problem without understanding, one, that we're behind because we've just been focused on a different sort of problem the last 2 decades, but two, this larger relationship, and how do we mend that relationship? And that's a really challenging task, but it's imperative. So, a couple years ago, the Army kind of did, if you will, if you're familiar with a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, breakdown. Now, you're not going to see this chart anywhere in the Pentagon, but we kind of put this together, just put this down in plain speak. So we'll just go down, and this is kind of, if you will, the argument with why Futures Command was created. So before Futures Command was created, number one, the Army knew that it doesn't have a problem creating new things. It can create widgets all day long. The problem is they can't get the widgets to the soldier in the field. So how do you go after that? That's a big problem. Next, they have a lot of organizations dividing or just going around kind of sourcing technology from around the world and around our nation, but often they're not really pulling in all-encompassing companies, these what we would call in the defense sector non-traditional companies, which is why Army Applications Lab is really imperative, right? So we're focused on entrepreneurs, non-traditional solvers that kind of go after different types of challenges in unique and novel ways. We have a small business office. It has tens of thousands of small businesses out there on record. But I'll be honest with you, the processes and procedures that are associated with that, they're hefty. And if you're an entrepreneur and you're an innovator in this space, you do not have the time or the capacity or even the amount of capital to go through the process. You will be bankrupt by the time you get to the end of that process. So that's a challenge, and we need to be honest about that. We also have a lot of research teams focused, a couple years ago, developing priority solutions. But again, we are in the mindset of we have to fight Al-Qaeda, we have to fight terrorists. We're not worried about what we're going to have to potentially do. If worst case comes in 10 to 20 years, what are we going to have to do in that case? We're not thinking there. We weren't. We also have a mission to modernize its forces and equipment, right? But if you looked a couple years ago, you had across the Army organization, which is massive, different pieces of the puzzle line at different organizations all over the place. What that meant was that no one was responsible from beginning to end on kind of managing that, which is a problem. Because you would have things built in stovepipes or in silos, if you will, and they would just kind of sit on a shelf. And then you have duplicity. You have a lot of decayed technology, not modernizing. And lastly, we have a lot of really smart and passionate people, right? I mean, Army's Futures Command now has 25,000 incredibly talented people on it. The problem is they speak a different language than the non-traditional solver in the market. You say prototype to an entrepreneur, it means one thing. You say prototype to an Army, that's a whole different thing. They can't understand one another. And so when they try to talk, there's kind of just a basic communication breakdown. So the Army recognized all these different things, and they said, well, what are we going to do? How do we solve this? And they went long. They went on a long-term investment. They said, we're going to reorg the Army. It was the most significant reorganization of the Army since the 1970s, and they created the Army's Futures Command. And they brought in everybody that they could to the max extent practical by federal law under one roof, under one four-star command, General Murray, headquartered here in Austin, 25,000 people. Everybody from bringing in the operational soldier, so that's an artilleryman, an infantryman, a special operations officer, to the people who are defining the concepts of where war is going to be in 20 to 30 years, the individuals that are working in centers physically building prototypes, maker spaces, or what we call product integration facilities within the Army speak, and everything in between, people that write requirements. All of that now is under Army's Futures Command. So it's trying to again, max extent possible, go after these challenges that these weaknesses, if we will, that we saw, so we can kind of move forward. So that's why Army Futures Command was created, as well as Army Application Labs, specifically targeting those small businesses. Entrepreneurs hate being called small businesses, or non-traditional, by the way. So we say entrepreneurs, but to government, when we speak to government, we say small businesses or non-traditionals. It just depends on the audience. But that's what we're really focused on there. So lastly, before I just kind of wanted to break it over to questions and answers, I wanted like 3 big takeaways. The first, we realized that we kind of have to have a minor culture shift. The Army has been in operation for 244 years. We have some great culture, but we also have some kind of, if you will, ingrained culture that doesn't enable us to innovate at the speed of relevance. And so we need to kind of go after, how do we challenge our conventional approaches on how we build things? And we have to kind of do that from a top down as well as a grassroots effort bottom up within the Army, partnering with the commercial sector as well. Nextly, we know we have to be more broad, and how do we get solutions in to solve the challenging problems that we're facing, right? We can't just go over to the traditional defense innovators that we know, and we can't just go to the traditional Silicon Valley solvers. We have to go much broader than that. There's a lot of innovators out there across our nation. How do we get them into this space? How do we explain our problems in languages that they understand, and how do we get their solutions into the Army, provide value on both sides, both for the solver and both for the entrepreneur? And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, I think we have to kind of reinvigorate this military and civilian partnership. How do we get to that root cause of that relationship where people are processing working for their government and their military? You know, you can call me an idealist, but I think you can sit 2 people in a room from vastly different perspectives and have an open and honest conversation where you can explain each other's perspectives and, most importantly, listen. And you might not walk away with agreeing with one another, but you can at least start to build a relationship, start to build trust again. And I think we have to start there. We can't steer away from the fact that this is uncomfortable. We have to kind of hit it head on and have those conversations. And we're starting to do that. We're actually starting to see some great interest from entrepreneurs and investors alike, here in Texas especially, but in hotbeds of innovation across the entire nation. So that is absolutely imperative, and I think we have to start just talking openly and honestly about it and how we get there. So that being said, I think if we do those things, we can probably, ideally, again, the dream, right, is to kind of get to this next generation of high-tech revolution. How do we get there? How can we have that symbiotic relationship that we've experienced in the past with the government and the military and with the commercial sector, and vice versa? So with that, hopefully it wasn't too boring. Thank you. Are there any questions around the crowd? Come on, I'm an easy book. I can talk things about Disney too if you're not interested in the Army.
My name's George Kerna, and I was just wondering, can anybody just go up to Army Futures and talk, or do you...
That's a great question, sir. So the question is, can anybody go to Army Futures? So there's 2, to be clear, there's 2 offices for Army's Futures Command here. So there is the Army Futures Command headquarters, and to be honest, no, you can't just go up there because it's a lockdown building. That's the UT Systems building. But where I work, the Army Applications Lab, absolutely. That's at the Capitol Factory, half a block away. So if you're familiar, if you're from Texas, that's the larger Omni Hotel complex. Go up to the 8th floor, you can walk right into our office, and you can talk to somebody from the Army. More importantly, just us, you can talk to Air Force, you can talk to Defense Innovation Unit, which is responsible for innovation across the DoD space, and multiple other defense-oriented type innovation cells, all based within the Capitol Factory, all with open door policies. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, we would love to have you, please. I mean, we're here, that last point, that's what we do a lot. We have a lot of open and honest conversations there to kind of break down those barriers. Yes, ma'am.
My name's Linda Ballard. I'm a Dean of the School of Human Development and Education at St. Edward's University. Thank you. Excuse me. Looking forward, what what advice do you have for educators in the room who might be interested in how we can reconfigure our programs to be more marketable and be more usable for careers that you all see, and what's missing in those education of those individuals?
That's a great question. So when you say in terms of education, do you mean to work with the government or from the kind of more traditional commercial solvers?
Or either one.
Yeah, so I have much more experience in the commercial market than I do in government. So I will take that part. As far as how to work with the government, I'll let the government kind of define that for you. But that's a great question. I would say, so when I went to graduate school, I was fortunate enough to go to a great school that had a lot of innovation in it, right? So I would say the more that you can kind of tie disparate efforts together in terms of a curriculum, you can start to make interesting connections that wouldn't be made traditionally. And that was that, and so, in the program that I was in, it was very easy for me to go and take a course over at the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, and then take an operations management course and take a supply chain management course and take a business class. All really from 4 different departments, but then you tie it together when you think through, especially what I'm focused on is product innovation. These technologies are so cross-cutting that you can't just be stovepipe into, I just know this. Right? It requires that much broader swath of experience. What I like to say is an inch deep and a mile wide. If you can have just a little bit of an experience, just so you can understand and say, okay, I'm going to go Wikipedia that, or I'm going to pull up an article, or I'm going to read about this, just so you're aware. I think that's probably, and it's anecdotal, it's my experience, but that'd be my recommendation. Is that a fair answer?
Are you creating any opportunities, Porter, at the Accelerator for college students to come on board and maybe do a co-op or an internship and kind of get them immersed with this new technology?
It's funny you mention that. So the first thing, that's a great idea. I know we've explored the space, and I would love to kind of pick your brain about that one a little bit more as far as like a co-op or an internship. But this morning, we're actually at the UT job fair. So trying to do exactly that. So if I wasn't here, I'd be there trying to get some talent onto my team because we're scaling rapidly. So we started with about 5 people 6 months ago, and we're up to about 50 now. And we still have some positions to fill, and we're looking for that great talent. So that being said, we're looking to bring in the right talent in the door at multiple different levels, experienced or just straight out of graduate school or even undergraduate as appropriate. But to your point, I think that there's a lot that we could explore with bringing in and tying those, what you learn at a university, right, is really the next level. I think that's what a university brings, right? It's like not what you're doing currently, but what's coming on the frontier. And I think it's absolutely imperative to kind of have that talent flow through so you can have knowledge transfer. So we're not stuck in a stovepipe, just sitting in Army Applications Lab, just thinking the way things were last year because things are moving so fast. I think that's absolutely a brilliant idea, and I would love to explore it further. But right now, no, we don't have any current capability to do that. Yes, sir.
Hi, Joe Freeman. I'm with the Texas General Land Office here in Austin, and I support the Community Development Revitalization Program here in Austin as well. And we were tasked in 2017 to provide the short-term housing recovery for FEMA, and we can identify the gaps between state government and federal government all day long. But what initiatives are there, or what can you recommend for there to be technology for a support structure, if you will, for straight lines of communication between state and federal employees that are on the ground supporting the mission?
That's a great question, and I don't have a good answer for that. I wish, right? We even within Army Futures Command, I mean, we joke is 3 mergers and acquisition and a startup all in a year, right? So there's a lot of moving pieces, and we have a hard time just communicating within each other, much less communicating across state to local federal government. I don't have a good answer for you, sir. I wish we had the tool. I mean, I would love it.
That would be like the silver bullet, right?
Yes, yeah. What I tell my team is just pick up the phone, go have a cup of coffee. And I know it's grassroots, but I think that you can get a lot from that. And then that person knows this person knows that person. You can kind of make connections in the network. Unfortunately, yeah, there's no cure-all right now that I know of. If you know of, please tell me. I would love to. I'll buy it, whatever it is. Yes, sir. Yeah. Any other?
So we have a lot of state and local government folks in the room, and I think all across government, federal, state, and local, one of the biggest challenges is bringing in entrepreneurs, right? I think most people here want to bring in newer companies, innovative companies, particularly here in Austin. What advice would you give to government employees to help either get across the red tape or to reach out to entrepreneurs and bring them into their offices to learn the cool things they're doing in AI or robotics, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So I have a couple of different thoughts kind of ruminating in my head around that. The first would be try to just immerse yourself. We have a strategic pillar we call it being entrepreneur obsessed on our team. And the reason we call it that is because we want you to become obsessed with what it is to be in their shoes. We have a lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, where we tried to do startups and we failed. And so we have that, if you will, that understanding of what it's to be like an entrepreneur, where you're literally living paycheck to paycheck, or maybe 2 paychecks behind, and you're going around, you've got a pitch deck, and you're trying to get capital for your business, and you're heavily emotion invested, and all these different things. So the first thing is just try to understand where they're coming from, and understand, if you will, their operating paradigm, because it is fundamentally different. So you can't just assume that they're a company that's going to be able to be there for 2 years, right? And I got off a great call with a venture capitalist yesterday asking this exact question: how can I help entrepreneurs work with us? He said, well, one, realize that you only have at launch, for the greatest companies, what we would call like post-Series A, that have been invested in, 18 months of runway until they need to run more money. So you have 18 months from the get-go to actually have something out the door in a full embedded recurring revenue contract. 18 months, year and a half. That's not much time when you think about government process, right? So just understanding that, and then kind of understanding how can you create value within that context to the maximum extent of your capability. That would be the number one recommendation that I would have. The other one I would say is look to leverage talent from that from that world, right? And I know that you're like, oh, you're never going to be able to get them. They don't pay as much, and this and that and the other. But I will tell you, well, I'm kind of a millennial. I'm dating myself, but my wife definitely is, and I have a lot of friends that are. I will tell you that from my experience, there is a lot of a desire, there's a big desire to go after really complex problems, right? There's a heavy emotional connection to solving complex problems. They see the challenges that we have at a governmental level, at a societal level. Whether it's global warming, whether it's national defense, whatever it is, there's a lot of interest in trying to solve that. So you have a really big negotiation chip on your table to say, I've got some really complex problems. Now, I might not pay as much, but if you want to have an impact behind counting bottle caps, I got a really cool proposition for you. So that's another one that I think we've had some really good traction with. And you don't have to say, do it for your country. I mean, of course, those are very important things, but even just the extent of being able to think creatively and outside of the box and going after challenging problems, I think that is a really great way to go after this different sort of talent pool that wouldn't traditionally go there and work for you. You just kind of have to learn how to speak their language and break down the barriers. There is a Defense Digital Service. If you ever have the capability, you have some time in the break, I would Google this organization. It's within Department of Defense. Defense Digital Service is really a thing that was spun up a couple of years ago, and it's headquartered out of DC, out of the Pentagon, and it's funny. So the current director is the co-founder of the app OpenTable. So this is the traditional Silicon Valley entrepreneur. He has no need to be working for the government, but does so because he has this vested interest that he runs what he calls his nerd herd. They're the only guys running around in the Pentagon with hoodies and flip-flops. And they're like just out there to solve problems. Those people exist. And he was, we sat down, we had a great conversation. He's like, these people exist, but we got to open our aperture and understand, one, how to converse with them, and two, understand that they might not meet the traditional, if you will, frame of what that employee might look like. And if you break down your mental model on that, I think you have a lot of capability to bring in some talent that helps you bridge that gap too. So that's a very long answer to a really complex problem. But I would just try to understand where they're coming from, embed yourself with them, become obsessed with it, so you can kind of at least carry a conversation they understand their interest, and then look to kind of bring people on your team so that way you can, again, have that knowledge transfer. Yes, sir.
I'm here then to hear you. here to give you the same advice that you just gave her for you. And I'm rephrasing that as, I'll use a gross term, the aging. Okay. The aging should be a great source for you, especially in Austin. They worked for, say, Motorola. Motorola left town. And they're doing some stuff, but a lot of times they're doing stuff that's so far out, the angels don't want to invest in them. They want a quick, they are their counterparts, but are looking for their retirement money. These guys are looking for fulfillment, joy. They probably have enough to get along so they can live on a military, or live maybe for a while without a success and then make a success.
Yes, sir.
I just think you're missing a talent.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for what you're getting at is we don't want to be age-biased. Absolutely, we don't want to be age-biased. I don't want to be anything biased, to be clear. I mean, if you've got a great capability, I don't care, as long as you're not from a foreign country that has adverse intentions of what the United States wants. Yeah.
And the variety that you're looking for is there.
Yes, sir.
Well, the country is there. I have 3 of my grandchildren, Army officers.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I mean, more than happy to hear about that. But that's a fair point, right? I mean, we don't want to be age biased. So I'll be the first to say there is that tendency within this world to say, oh yeah, you got to be wearing a hoodie and flip-flops, and if you're not cool, and you just don't have good solutions. That's not the truth, because I've had multiple different people from Austin specifically walk into my office with great capabilities. Yes, sir.
Obviously, developing and onboarding the innovative technologies themselves is one thing, but in terms of application, how integrated with the actual military itself is future Army technology with application of tactics and strategy when it comes to actually using the stuff in the field?
So if I understand your question, where are we with how to integrate technology into the field versus just kind of, if you will, in a sandbox? Is that the question?
Pretty much, and also develop the sort of strategies that will help it be used by the warfighter.
Yeah, so what you can see, that's a great question. So what you can see at large is, especially for things like artificial intelligence, there are broad cross-cutting technology that requires a significant tech stack to enable that. So that's why, one, the Pentagon has stood up things like the Joint Artificial Intelligence Task Force. So it is not just Army, it's not just anybody, it's a joint cross-cutting DoD effort to understand if we're going to work together in the future, everybody has to kind of be on the same common operating picture. So there are all those initiatives. They're relatively new, I'll be honest, but they're out there. And so we're just trying to get the conversation started and trying to build in alignment with that. So to the next point, where are we in terms of the operational capabilities? So what I would say, number one is, at least what we're trying to do with Army Futures Command and Army Applications specifically, so we already said we're entrepreneur obsessed. The other big strategic focus is being called what we call warfighter champions. So if you're familiar with standard product innovation, you don't want to just build things with the assumption of what your end user wants, right? That's really how you build bad products. There's so many different business cases out there from the commercial side that can tell you that. So what we do is go right out to the field. I mean, that's the first thing we do. If we have a problem, that's where we start. We go to the field and we say, what's your problem? And that actually that's actually kind of a challenge for Army and traditional DoD. They don't know how to say their problem. They know how to say requirement. Give me this, that, this size, this specific thing, and give it to me in 20 years. That doesn't work anymore. So we have to kind of bring them back to, okay, what's your problem? And we go out to the field. The next step is we get the solver and we say, okay, if there's a capability to solve that problem, put them right in the field. So in the last 6 months, to give you a tangible effort of how we've done this in the lab, within the last 6 months, we've had one Texas-based company that does in-depth data science, essentially artificial intelligence and algorithms, and they're advanced data scientists. In the past, the way the Army did this was you have your data scientists in the United States, and you have your operators, whatever capability in whatever what they call the AO, the operational environment, right? So that might be the Middle East, that might be the Pacific environment, that might be South America, whatever. But you have the soldiers in the field and you have the data scientists in the United States. If you know anything about artificial intelligence, it's about half science, it's about half art. You can't do the art unless you're sitting there with the person that can tell you what the art needs to be. So it wasn't really hard. All we did was we said, hey, give them security clearance, put on a flak jacket and a helmet, and if you're willing to, we'll fly you out to where you need to be. And we did that. We did that 6 months. We started in the Middle East, and we had amazing results. Amazing results that helped curb the potential negative effect of when ice is crumbled. We went from there and we said, so that was our POC phase, proof of concept phase, so just very small instantiation. We went from there, and then we leveraged it into the Pacific Theater at more scale, what we call a pilot phase. Again, right in the theater, right with the solver, right with the soldier. How can we scale this capability? And now we're in a phase of transition into scale for the Army, because just people are like, wow, it's amazing, it's so innovative. It's really not, right? We just kind of challenged the assumption that you couldn't do it. But it's all based on the fact that we, in our DNA, believe that you have to have the solver next to the problem to create the magic, and we do that iteratively the entire time. We never want to just build and then hand off something to a soldier, because that's where you end up with really bad products. Does that answer that question? I know it's a very long, involved answer, but I wanted to make sure I hit it the right way. Any other questions? I think we're out of time. Perfect. If you have anything else, yes, especially Disney stuff, I can answer that. Government policy questions, I'm not that great at, but I do appreciate your time today. Thank you very much for being here, and I'm excited to be here as well. Thank you.